Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Daily with Jay and Clay. We are glad you made it. And as always, Clay came up with the list. I'm just saying, I had nothing to do with where this conversation is going to go. And to be honest with you, I didn't even really read his email that he sent me so I could be prepared, which is always, it just makes it more exciting, right? Hopefully the rooster will crow and my cat will jump up here and my dog will bark and my kid will run in. And then that will distract me because that helps. With that, I apologize in advance. I don't do this very often. I'm not paid for this, but I'm a little bit hyped up on this Monster Energy drink. Okay. So here we are. So hence the onset here. We really appreciate you so very much. Hit the thumbs up for you don't even know what we're going to talk about, but hit the thumbs up anyway. It doesn't cost a nickel. It's pretty easy to do. It's the little hand that looks like that. And then subscribe if you haven't. The one ask that I do have, though, for real, is if you are involved in any sort of a veteran group organization, whether it's a big one like VFW or American Legion or DAV, or if it's a smaller group, share the channel, share the information, so that way people can be in the know, right? The whole purpose is to eliminate the I wish I would have known. So with that, Clay, I know that what you put together, kind of, I barely saw a title, but I know that the idea behind what you put together was to eliminate some I wish I would have known.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'd love for you to kind of give us the wave top of what we're going to dive into, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Clay.
Absolutely. And food for thought, right? When Jason doesn't know what we're going to talk about, you're going to get his real responses. And so it's going to indicate, the level of knowledge that Jason has here. Because I have the cheat codes. I'm the one who does the research prior to these videos. So there's two topics, Jason, we're going to talk about. First is the basis of service connection, because it changes. The evidence you need changes depending on the basis of service connection, and that flies over everyone's head all the time. So we're really going to break that down. And then once we do that, there's 5 different bases for service connection. We're going to hone in on common secondary claims. And just real quick, I'm going to show everyone. I have made a list myself. It's a Word document. This is going to be pinned below in the comments, and it goes over types of conditions. So ankles, here are secondaries to that. We have ear conditions. Here are secondaries to the ears, and then so on and so forth all the way down the road. And then I have some notes here, and then, of course, some shameless plugs, but we're not going to do that over here on this channel. The common secondaries are there for you to look at. So with that, Jason, there are 5 bases of service connection. You have direct, you have secondary, you have aggravation. That's probably the most difficult. You have presumptive, and then a very, very niche subject, to be technically correct, is
I love this
conditions
one.
caused by VA healthcare, right? So if you had a botched surgery, that can be service connected. You can also file a tort claim. You're definitely going to want a lawyer up. That is a whole video, but we'll mention it to be correct. And so I'll start this out, Jason, for direct, which is the most common. It's the big 3. We talk about the big 3 all the time. It's for direct. You need to have the in-service event as is defined by the VA, which is essentially evidence from service. There's medical evidence. That's really good. There's evidence other than medical, which is still good, but not on the same, totem pole as medical evidence. And sometimes you have to get creative from that. So the in-service events, as you like to say, I know you like to say time in service. However you want to phrase that, it's got to be from service. Of note, it's not optional. People are like, well, I don't really need evidence from service. It's like, yeah, you do. Okay, you absolutely do. It might come in the form of something else other than medical, but there's evidence from service. The second criteria for the big 3 on direct is a current diagnosis. No diagnosis, no claim. And then the nexus, that's the basis of service connection. It's directly related to military service, and it looks at your evidence from service, your current diagnosis, and that becomes the foundation for that direct military service. My time in the Marine Corps calls this That's what direct service connection is. Jason, do you want to add to direct at all?
Yeah, I want to expand it a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's not so much that my time in the Marine Corps caused X. It includes that, but I like to look at it more like my time in the service. During my time in the service, I developed X,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that what happens is a lot of people really get kind of in their own minds put into a corner of I need to absolutely show that the military caused this issue. Even if you've had it and developed it, it manifested during your time in service. Sometimes you're sitting there going, well, I don't really know. I mean, I come from a family that had this, and I probably would have had this condition anyway. The
Mm-hmm.
military, like I didn't eat an MRE and then all of a sudden I got some sort of weird, stomach issue from MRE. Well, maybe you did, but the point is that let's use like migraines, right? So migraines, all of a sudden you came in, you went through MEPS, everything's fine. You never had a migraine or even a headache in your life. 2 years after you started your time in service, next thing you know, you started getting migraines and you're like, wow, this sucks. Okay. Did the military cause them? Would have you gotten them even if you didn't join? It's this weird blurry thing. And the way that the VA looks at it is, look, if it showed up during your active duty time, you're going to be good. The problem is, how do you prove it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do? We all did the same thing, especially, and it's usually the one-term people, right? That I did 4 years, I did 6 years. This is that most vulnerable group, in my opinion, as far as documentation is concerned, because it's a bunch of E1, 2, 3, 4s. Maybe you hit E5, maybe, right? If you did a 6 year, maybe you did. And it's these lower ranks though that are like, I'm not going to the battalion aid station. I'm not going to sick call, right? I mean, granted, there was a few that did, but you saw what happened to them. So you're like, oh, I'm not going. I'm cool.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. Hey, why are you limping? Oh no, I just I'm fine, right? So we would go to our medics, our corpsmen, get a handful of Motrin, take that, drink water, move on. Well, we didn't know at that time that we were shooting ourselves in the foot by not documenting any of it. So now what happens, Clay, is that when we look back at those big three that you talk about, and the way that I describe it is, look, you have to have your time in service, right? Entry, exit, that creates the window of opportunity. 2, the diagnosed condition, like you had talked about, you must absolutely have a diagnosed condition. You have to have a condition that you're going to get service connected, right? That condition must be chronic in nature, have some sort of residual effect. It can't just be some one-off and now you're 100% better from it. It has to be a
Mm-hmm.
real ongoing problem. The third thing is that nexus that you talked about. That's the link between the condition itself and your time in service. And again, Clay, this is where everybody gets a little bit weird. And they're like, well, if I have to prove that it's service connected, I have to prove that the military caused it. No, unless it did, right? So again, the world of nuance, like we always talk about. So back to the migraine situation, right? Did the military cause your migraines? I don't know, right? Because you don't know, right? Humvee rolls over and breaks your leg. Of course, that did. So with the migraine situation, there's a couple things here that I want to touch on, and I want to kick it back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So here you are, and you're trying to prove the fact that this is a service-connected condition, and we've talked about this previously in other videos. What if you never mentioned it during your time in service? Well, now you have no in-service evidence whatsoever. None. Not even a mention from yourself anywhere. Not even in a letter that you wrote to home with a date on it and a stamp and all that stuff that says, man, my migraines are killing me. There's nothing. You have 0 things from your time in service. So I'm going to kick it to you because I can keep talking. So I want to hear it from you.
Yeah.
And then I'll jump in and kind of give my 2 cents on it or double down on what you say. What does somebody do when they don't have any in-service documentation that's required, right? You
Mhm.
said it's required. You must have in-service documentation. How do you bridge that gap of, hey, look, I know I'm the patient. I know that I started having migraines during service. I want to get those service connected. I got my diagnosis. I got my time in service. I have no in-service stuff. Tell me what I do, Clay.
Yeah, so I'm going to start this with two things can be true. Okay. One, fact. It's a fact. It's not an opinion. You must have the in service event for direct service connection. Yes, that's fact. Another fact, how many veterans have medical documentation from service to actually build the nexus? And the answer is not that many, right? Not that many. And so now that leaves us in a boat of your question. What do I do if I fall into that overwhelming majority? I don't have medical evidence. And first, for framework, I think veterans need to understand you're automatically fighting a losing battle, right? You're fighting uphill, which means the burden of evidence gathering is that much more heavier on your shoulders. So you have to realize that first, because that's really going to prompt you for what's next. And to be real with you, Jason, that's really where statements and buddy letters will come into play. And I don't want to say, the statement and buddy letter alone is going to service connect your claim, because there's going to be other aspects of that. However, you need to plug that hole. There's this huge hole of medical evidence missing, which sucks. That's also a fact, right? But now you need to fill that, whether it's a personal statement saying I took over the counter medication, maybe you had a spouse, a doc, your corpsman, your medic, whatever that looks like for you. Anyone who can talk about, you can use, super strength, whatever it's called, Tylenol, instant release gels. You took 4 to 6 of them every single day. Whatever that looks like for you, Motrin, ibuprofen, Advil, over the counter medication. And the more evidence that you have, the more lay evidence, I should say, the more lay evidence you have saying, hey, this event actually happened, will help you get towards that service connection. Now, I also want to bring this up too, because you have to look at the truths, right? So, yes, medical evidence is required. Most veterans don't have medical evidence, so they have to rely on lay evidence. Another truth is the VA claims process, initial claims, is not really geared towards using lay evidence as concrete evidence. That's why I said, I corrected myself and said lay evidence. If there's a totem pole of golden standard evidence, you would have your health assessments up at the top, right? Like your MEPS exam, your final physical, your annual health assessment, then your pre and post deployment health assessments. That's the golden standard. Lay evidence is all the way down here at self-report, which is still considered evidence, but it's lay evidence. And you will really see that come into play, in my opinion. You won't find this in regulation, but you'll really see statements come into play during the Board of Veteran Appeals, which I hate that I even have to say that, because that shouldn't be the case. Is that VSR going to read your statement? Let's just assume that's the case. They're still heavily going to rely on the CMP examiner, and the CMP examiner, who's medical professional, is looking for medical evidence. So you could logically say, well, I don't have any. That's going to come back as less likely as not, which is probably going to be the case. And so looking at another truth, right? Multiple things are true at the same time. If I was submitting a claim without medical evidence or any evidence from service, one, I would do everything I can to plug that hole. I've seen people use fit reps or NCOERs to fill that gap. I've seen personnel reports, DD-214, statements, buddy letters, anything you can fill that hole, do it. But I would also, as an assumption, meaning to continue planning, right? I would also assume that claim is going to be denied, and to write my statements as if I'm writing them to the rater, aka the judge at that point, right? Just so I'm connecting the dots and building that story. That would be my number one advice. But by you plugging that hole, could you be service connected? Absolutely. I see it happen all the time. Could you be denied? Absolutely. I see it happen all the time, right? So I would just plan to go ahead and appeal that. And that is the thorn in every veteran's side, is medical evidence from service. I hope I
Right.
answered your question right.
Yeah. No, you did great. I'm 100% in agreement. I'm going to add a little bit in there and just kind of double down on a couple things you said. One, building the story is absolutely essential. It has to make sense. If you don't have actual medical documentation evidence from your time in service, then your story better be a good one and it better make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who can treat something with over the counter medication that most people do treat with over the counter medication, that's already something that's in your favor and makes sense, right? If just a normal person goes, well, if you had migraine, what would you tell that person to do? You would tell them to go take some Motrin and aspirin and call it a day. Most people don't say, well, oh, you have a migraine, you need to go to the hospital right now. Nobody does that, right? They say, hey, I got some Motrin, you need some? So that's already kind of building on a story that makes sense. If you broke your back and you're saying, yeah, I broke my back in service, oh, I just don't have any medical evidence, I just took some Motrin. Well, your story's already kind of a little rocky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because chances are, if you broke your back, you have something in your medical file with the fact that you had to be carried somewhere, airlifted, something, right? So your story has to make sense. Very important. And what are you going to write that on? You're going to write that yourself, right? You're going to write that on a form, the 4138. So it's 214138. And that's the form. You're going to write your story. And look, I've said this 1,000 times. I know you're sick of it, Clay, but I'm going to say it again. Treat this like it's $1 million or multi-million-dollar deal, because it is. Don't write 4 sentences and call it a day. Be detailed and write it out. I like your point on you're writing it in hopes that you're going to get it service connected at the VA, but you also have the contingency plan of writing it to where the veterans law judge can look at it and make sense. You don't want any questions remaining from your story. You want everything tied in and all make sense. So walk them through it, right? Explain your circumstances. I'm not going to sit here and write a story for you out of my mouth right now. You can figure that out, right? Make sure that it makes sense. Explain your circumstances. You were getting hands full of Motrin. They never documented anything. You called it a day. You were fearful of whatever. You didn't want to go to the battalion aid station. You never knew that there was actual real medication out there other than Motrin. You figured that was it. Whatever. Write it out and really explain it. Time frames, durations, all of that type of stuff. What you're trying to do here is prove the nexus. This might have been something, I mean, your time in service may have been 30 years ago. Your severity is on your documentation today. Your nexus is on your documentation from back then, which you have none. So you're explaining the documentation, or you're explaining why you don't have any documentation. You can do what we call buddy statements, right? The buddy statement is actually on a different form. You don't use the 4138, you use the 10210 form. So it's 21-10210, whatever. It's a lot of numbers. It's a different form. Utilize that for your buddies. Anybody that served with you can basically vouch for understanding and seeing that you suffered from migraines in this example. Family members, people that, parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, people that knew you before you joined and can say, hey, look, I can vouch that they never had any issues, never knew them to have any problem until that one Christmas when they came back on leave and they sat down with a bottle of Motrin at the table. And I was like, what the heck, right? They can write statements explaining it too. And like you said, Clay, I agree. Does the VA always get it right? No. Should they? Sure. But they don't. That's what the board's for. And this stuff really does come into play there. So with that, I'm in total agreement with what you're saying. I love the story aspect. I love the statements piece. And can you get these things approved and get service connected without any in-service documentation? Absolutely. You just have to work at it, and the story has to make sense. That's my last 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Direct is the most common. In food, it's easy to bash the VA. They make it very easy, believe it or not. You just have to just look and you'll find it. However, the process does work, right? 7 million plus veterans are service connected. It doesn't matter who you use, the process is the same for everyone. The process does work. Sometimes veterans have to put a little effort into it, right? Like when I was at school, I had to put more effort into studying versus like someone else because they were super smart, right? I joined the Marine Corps, whatever. If that tells you anything, right? Same thing with VA claims. You might, based on your evidence, you might have to do a little more leg work. So direct is the most common way for service connection. The second most common, and that's a pun there, is secondary, right? You see, I know I am absolutely hilarious.
That's
So
pretty good.
secondary, people mix secondary up all the time. The basis for service connection completely changes. It's not the big three. It's the big three altered, right? And so now instead of evidence from service, that means nothing at that point. You don't need evidence from service. What you need is evidence as to why X is connected to Y, right? So why is my PTSD causing my migraines or aggravating my migraines? And then the claim would be migraines secondary to PTSD. And so just understanding the basis of service connection will now kind of dictate how you speak to your healthcare team. And so it's like, hey, doc, I get migraines. Usually, whenever, an example could be when I have a panic attack, my blood pressure rises, I start sweating. I really get anxious as to whatever's going on. And then soon after that, I'll get a migraine. That would be evidence kind of connecting migraine secondary to PTSD. Now, food for thought, you can't just say that. Okay, fraud is real. It has to be real. And then on secondaries, and they do this for direct as well, but not to the same level. Secondaries also look at competing evidence. So, for instance, let's just hypothetically say last month at your construction job, you fell and hit your head, you have head trauma, and now you have migraines. All of a sudden your PTSD causing migraines is a little low compared to, a hammer hitting your head and now you have migraines. So the VA, and I'm using that as like a small, simple example. The VA is going, and I say the VA, I mean the CMP examiner is going to look at competing evidence. And so that's really going to come into play. And so what does evidence gathering look like for secondaries? It looks like getting evidence that indicates the secondary exists in the first place. I'll say one thing, Jason, and then I'm going to pass it to you because this is a part that everyone forgets. So tinnitus causes migraines. It doesn't, but whatever. That's what YouTube says, okay? So tinnitus causes migraines, got it. And that's it. That's the only evidence people will have, which is not evidence. That's just a statement. Tinnitus causes migraines. You'll find literature where tinnitus does cause migraines. And guess what? You'll find literature where tinnitus does not cause migraines. And so you can't just say your migraine stems from your tinnitus. The question I always have veterans answer, and I'm going to kick it back to you, is the question is, does your migraines stem from your tinnitus? It's not a one size fits all. This is a snapback. Okay. Someone with a big head can wear it. Someone with a small head can wear it. Tinnitus secondaries is not a snapback. Okay. So does your migraine stem from your tinnitus? It doesn't matter what Bob's is. It doesn't matter what Joe's are. Okay. It's individual basis and people forget that all the time. All right. I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I wasn't really thinking about that in this moment. But yeah, it's really irritating. And I think that we, honestly, you and I, do a pretty good job about going, look, it's nuanced. Don't go chasing claims just because somebody says this will get you that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your life, right? Everybody's situation's different, and go after and get rated appropriately for your own conditions. So with secondaries are huge, by the way. Because that is really for most people. Okay. Obviously, there's always exceptions to the rule. There's people that go, hey, I filed for 4 claims. I'm 100% right out the gate. Life is great, except for my conditions. But you get what I'm saying. So with Secondary conditions, that is typically the way people are going to make it into those higher ratings, those 80s, 90s, 100%. And also, quite frankly, it is also something that can open up the door for TDIU. Somebody who's sitting at a 30 or 40, now they file in a couple more secondary conditions. It pumps them into the area or the arena for TDIU, which is also a great benefit that you can utilize by having those secondary conditions actually realized. Secondary conditions, in my opinion, really boil down to two things. And it's, look, what you're getting here is you're getting versions of the same thing from both of us, and hopefully it just kind of just cements things for people. The two things for a secondary, well, first, what you don't need for a secondary is you don't need to prove your time in service, right? So that's one. So the two things you need is, one, a diagnosis. Just like with a regular service-connected claim, you need to actually have a condition. So you need a diagnosis of whatever you are going to utilize as your secondary condition that you're going to file for. So I have a condition that I'm diagnosed for. Then the second piece is a nexus, but the nexus, like you had mentioned, Clay, shifts from your time in service to a service-connected condition. So you're tying it to that. Now, how can you do that? Well, what I tell people to do is, because again, it's very nuanced, it's more about giving people the tools to realize what they could actually file for instead of telling them what they could file for, especially when we can't actually have a conversation with somebody. So I'm not going to tell you that you can file for anything, right? What you should do is take all of your service-connected conditions, your direct service-connected, and Google search secondary condition to my condition that's service connected. See what pops up. Believe me, the Mayo Clinic, all these other places are going to VA lawyers, or veterans lawyers, veteran law lawyers pop up with different things on their websites. Read through them. See what common things are. And if you actually have one of those conditions, you're in a good spot to get that service connected. Now, there may be other information out there, like, for example, I think it was the K2 veterans who had all that uranium deposits, right? There's no presumptive conditions for if you served there, but there is documentation and some released reports that show that there was like abnormally high uranium in that location. So if you could prove that you were there and you can get those reports that show it, right? You could actually utilize that as evidence. Now, I know I kind of got off track from secondaries, but the point is that do your research. Do your research on connecting this condition to this service-connected condition. Once you see that there's something there, even if it's a report or some sort of a study from some university, but like you said, Clay, there could be competing evidence somewhere else. The important piece is are you going to supply more evidence? Or am I going to supply 3 layers of evidence that support my claim and they only find one against it? Fine. I have a report from University X that says that it does connect. Fine. You found a report from University Y that says that it doesn't. Cool. Those wash. Now I supplied 2 more pieces of evidence that say that it does. I got a pretty good chance at winning, right? You want to work with your doctor. Whatever doctor actually diagnosed you with your secondary condition that you're going to file for, ideally, maybe they're involved with your first one too, but you want them to tie a nice bow around those, explaining that you have this condition that's service connected and that this condition, either because of its nature or because of the medication you're taking, has now caused this other condition for you, right? You want it black and white, very clear, very pointed, very yes, this caused this, period. End of story. Signed, Dr. So-and-so with love. Now you have that and you're going to supply that with your diagnosis, right? Diagnosis and a good letter and any other supporting documents that show that those things are connected in some way should be supplied. Now there's 2 things here, right? One, we're trying to get this rated as a secondary. Okay, that's a focus. That's you need that to happen. Then the next piece of it is you also want to make sure that it's rated appropriately. So
Mm-hmm.
make sure that when you're working with your doctor that you're actually reading, and if you don't understand it, that's fine. Print it out, take it with you to your doctor, and show them from the schedule of ratings what levels of impairment are the VA looking at, and have that conversation with your doctor. If the doctor says, "Oh yeah, you meet all of these 5 things," great. Now I know that I meet all of these 5 things. I should be rated whatever 30% for that condition. Awesome. Can you put that in that letter, that same verbiage in that letter that ties these 2 things together? That would be great. Now, you putting that effort and that energy up front is going to save you heartache later when you realize, oh, I was shortchanged by the VA. They lowballed me, blah, blah, blah. No, give them the information they need to give you the rating that you deserve, right? The appropriate rating. I'm never going to say that everybody should be the maximum. No, but you
Mm-hmm.
should be what you should be, right? And oftentimes we absolutely shoot ourselves in the foot at the C&P exam because we don't know what they're looking for. And so what's a doctor to do at a C&P exam? Well, I mean, they can't guess. So they're going to, well, I mean, they said kind of the minimum things. So here you go. I mean, you have the diagnosis. So you're automatically going to be, if you're going to be service connected or secondary service connected, and you don't give them all the evidence they need for the severity, you're automatically the lowest. You're
Yeah.
automatically the lowest rating. So why not give them what they need? All right. That's my soapbox. I'm off of it.
Yeah, I want to, before we move on to aggravation, I want to bring up probably the most common competing evidence scenario, and that's sleep apnea and obesity. So I am 6 foot, okay, 6 foot flat, tall, handsome, right? At least that's what I like to
You
call
look
myself.
short.
No, I'm 6 foot flat. I'm
Wow.
185 pounds, 180 on a good day, 185 whenever I ate too much food, right? So I'm packing, right? I'm kidding. I'm saying that because if I had sleep apnea, which I don't, but if I was diagnosed with sleep apnea and I submitted sleep apnea secondary to anxiety or PTSD or whatever, um, the VA is unable to use obesity as a factor as competing evidence. Right now, let's switch that scenario. Let's say I'm 6 foot, 260, and I'm you know I'm sitting like this and I'm huge. Um, and I have zero evidence that indicates my obesity stemmed from service. So I can't use it as an intermediate step. Now, if I claim sleep apnea secondary to PTSD, the VA can say, hey, there is some correlation between PTSD and sleep apnea. That's good. However, you're 260 pounds. There's a causative relationship. So causative beats correlation every day of the week. And we're denying you based on obesity, right? And the rationale will put that in doctor speak much better than I just did. But that is the most common thing I see. And it's also a YouTube phenomenon where people will talk about sleep apnea secondary to PTSD because it is a 50% rating. It's high value. However, the question is, I go back to the question, does your sleep apnea stem from your PTSD, or is it related to weight? Is it related to some medication you're taking? And that's a two-way street, right? So if you're not obese, if you're taking gabapentin for a service-connected disability, if you were exposed to burn pits and had direct exposure over a long period of time, all those are factors for your case. And if you don't have those, they're also factors the VA can use. So just think of evidence, think of secondaries as what are my arguments to Service Connect secondary? What's the VA's arguments to not Service Connect? And just understanding that baseline will help you gather evidence to say, hey, VA, I'm not fat, right? And I'm using that as a generality. But sleep apnea as the example, but that goes for every single claim there. Do you want to add to that or do you want to move on to aggravation?
Let's move on to
All
aggravation.
right. I love talking about fat people and sleep apnea. That's a joke. You can hate me in the comments. That's fine. Okay. So, aggravation, right? So aggravation it's not common. However, there is a common claimed disability that is denied due to aggravation all the time. And I'm going to use that as the example here, Jason. And that is flat feet. I see all the time, more often than not, where a veteran claimed flat feet, and in their MEPS exam, okay, no, I'm kidding. In their
Yeah.
MEPS exam, so their entrance exam, they will have a one-liner note in there that says
Yep.
asymptomatic flat feet. I
Yep.
see that almost every single time flat feet's denied. That's the line I
Yep.
see in a MEPS exam. And now on aggravation, it completely changes. In my opinion, this is the most difficult claim to win. It completely changes the basis of service connection, which in turn changes the evidence. So evidence from service, it still matters, but having a diagnosed flat feet means nothing because you were already diagnosed. Even
Hmm.
if that condition got worse, um, which is good for service connection, that's not the standard for aggravation. It's not it
Right.
got worse. The
Right.
standard is, did your service make that condition worse? Key word here, key phrase, beyond its natural regression. Your
Right.
feet are going to get worse. They're static in nature, okay?
Mhm.
Your flat feet will get worse. The question, so I'm going to use a little, imagine there's a chart in front of me. Your foot condition will decline like that. Doesn't matter if you were in service, if you played soccer, if you worked fast food or went to college, your flat feet will decline. And at some point, it'll be asymptomatic, maybe acute, and then chronic, right? So you're on this downward
Mhm.
trajectory until you die. That's an uplifting message.
Good
Now,
job.
for aggravation, what you have to do is I had asymptomatic flat feet, something happened, and now my chart looks like this, right? Maybe I did foot patrols over 7 combat deployments with a flak on, my Kevlar,
Right.
my rifle, ammo, my
Yeah.
back, whatever the case may
Mhm.
be. But that line is no longer natural regression. It
Right.
went beyond its natural
Yep.
regression.
Yep.
And I'll say this last thing, and I'll shoot it over to you. That is so hard to prove.
Yep.
That is it's not a flat feet diagnosis.
Right.
It's got to be
Yep.
something happened to make that
Right.
way worse, and it's
Yep.
super hard. It's so
Right.
hard and it sucks. All right, go
Yep.
ahead.
And that's a great example. Um, it's most of us will not have to deal with this because we came in clean slate from MEPS, right?
Mhm.
No issues, no problems, moving on. Flat feet is something that's visually noticeable. So that's why it gets that one liner, right? Um, yeah, very difficult. And I'm going to preface it with this, Clay, and this is probably not what you're expecting me to say as we're talking about aggravation type claims. I think that sometimes veterans get so focused on wanting to file for something specific that sometimes they lose sight of other things that they could possibly file for.
Yeah.
And they just are chasing this one thing because they're like, that's the one, and you're losing time and money by not taking a step back and looking at everything you could file for and stop chasing something that's probably going to be just garbage, right? Just a horrible claim because why? One, it's hard to prove. And I'm not saying don't file for it. Sure, file for it. But like you said, you have to show, like with hearing, right? Everybody's hearing decreased. That's why the hearing rating schedule sucks so bad. I
Yeah.
hate that's the one I hate. So there is a natural degradation or degraded whatever. I can't talk. So you know what I'm trying to say. It naturally gets worse over time, right? And so same thing with your flat feet, like you said. So that I love the graph. It was very artsy and colorful.
Mhm. You're
Thanks for
welcome.
bringing
Yes.
that up. And so yes, you need to show that it got much worse. Now, chances are, unless you actually went to the doctor while you were in service, that's even harder now. So if you just dealt with it and pushed forward and, all of that, well, you probably are, it's a very steep hill now to climb. Now, if you, on the other side, if it got so bad that you actually went to medical, and then they gave you like some sort of boot inserts or something for your feet. Well, now you all of a sudden, maybe it went faster than normal in the downward trajectory of it all. But here's the really bad part. The VA goes, well, you already had it and you were already going to get bad naturally. And so we're not going to give you the full rating. We're going to give you kind of a partial rating, how much it got worse beyond what it naturally would have gotten worse. So the math is funny, but I'm just going to give you the high level kind of vision of what it would feel like. Maybe you would have naturally gotten to a 10% by this time in your life. So they're going to call that zero and go, well, you would have been there anyway. So we're not even going to give you anything. So even though you might be rated at a 20%, if it was a true service connection, they're not going to give that to you because you already had it. You were already going to go bad. So they're going to give you a piece of that. It might be a 0. It might be a 10. So don't think you're going to get the full rating based on the severity, because the VA is saying you already we're already messed up from this. We're not going to give you the full rating. We'll give you a partial rating, is essentially what happens. Work with an accredited rep, reach out to somebody who's accredited with the VA who can help you file that claim and really walk you through what you need to do to really document it. And I will tell you again, take a step back, look for everything else that you can file for too. Don't just hone in on one thing. What really drives me crazy, Clay, is people, and you would think it would be this way, but the VA doesn't work this way. And you know this, Clay. But we, as the service members, go, this one condition that I do have, I have like 5, but this one really bothers me the most. And so it's got to be a high rating because it bothers me so bad. But it might not be a high, you're back, right? It bothers me this is the one of all of them. This is the one. It bothers me so bad. I can't sleep. I wake up early. It's just horrible. Bam, that's the only one I'm filing for. And you get a 10%. You're like, what? So don't hyper focus on one thing, especially if it's an aggravated type of a condition that you're going to be filing for, because it may be very lackluster at the end of the day. At the end of the day, for all of us, Clay, I think that it's just making sure, like you have said before, we're trying to just make sure that we get rated appropriately for all of the conditions, whether they're service connected or secondary, and in this case, aggravated. But aggravated is not where the easy claims are, for sure, and they're oftentimes going to be very low ratings, if any.
Yeah, absolutely. At some definitely be properly rated, and I don't want people to misconstrue what I'm saying. However, if you have a claim that's been denied over and over again, maybe you take a step back and, 1, either continue to gather evidence for it, or 2, push that to the side. I say that for aggravation because when there's a lack of medical evidence for aggravation, it is so hard. Are you really going to go pay $1,500 for a nexus letter for a chance at aggravation? I would never recommend that for aggravation at all, especially on flat feet. And so it's just something else to discern about, right? And build your anxiety when it comes to submitting VA disability claims. Okay. Let's transition to presumptive. And I said presumptive. I also want to mention TARA here. And this one will be generally fast. Jason, I'll go ahead and cover TARA if you'd like to cover presumptive. So
Sure.
For TARA, TERA, it's toxic exposure risk activity. I want to be very clear here. TARA is over here. PACT Act is over here. They have
That's
nothing
pretty
to do with
clear.
each other. Yeah, they have nothing to do with each other outside of legislation. Okay, TARA is not presumptive at all. It's most closely aligned to secondary. So just like your evidence would shift for secondary, stemming from that service-connected disability, that's what TARA is. Your evidence shifts to, hey, I have a rhinitis due to asbestos exposure because I was on a naval ship and we're over here scraping whatever Navy people do. I don't know. I was a Marine, right? But it's the same basis as secondary, where the exposure, your evidence leads to exposure. And I'll say this specifically: a lack of evidence from terror claims is super common, and I don't really understand why. So I'm going to explain what I would do if I was submitting a disability claim where the connection was based on Terra. What I would do first and foremost is have a current diagnosis, right? If it's hypertension, if it's rhinitis, if it's sleep apnea can be connected via Terra. If it's migraines via Terra, whatever the connection is, I don't care. You need a clinical, current, chronic diagnosis. That's a bunch of C's, all right? No diagnosis, no claim. The second thing I would do, this is most important, is not just say I was exposed to asbestos. I want the VA to know my level of exposure. Someone who was 500 meters away who slept in the fob and there was a burn pit on the fob does not have the same level of exposure as the dude stirring human
Right,
feces, day in, day out because they're a private or they're a Lance Corporal.
right,
Or maybe they got in trouble and they're on extra punitive duty. So now they're just over here stirring. They got JP8. They're literally lighting the burn pit. Okay. I was that person. I didn't get in trouble. But in my private days, I had to do some grunt work as a grunt. That level of exposure for 6 months is much different than someone sleeping 100 meters away, right? And so the VA doesn't know that. The VA is not, they're not looking at, oh, this guy stirred poop, right? Because it's not in your records. And so a statement really detailing your level of exposure is only going to support your Terra claim. And I see that missing all the time. Veterans evidence was, oh, I was exposed to asbestos. It's like, okay, and so was everyone else, right? What is your exposure? Did you eat it? Right? Did you breathe it in? Were you sitting right next to it for 6 months, or were you sitting right next to it for 1 day? Because that matters when it comes to at least as likely as not connected via Terra. That's what Terra is. It still requires a medical opinion, but the opinion is not direct to service, it's via Terra. What's different about Terra and secondaries is your service treatment records, your personnel records, all the evidence from service do play a part in detailing your exposure, whereas secondary service connection, your service treatment records mean diddly squat because it's not connected to service, right? So Terra is not presumptive at all. It requires a medical opinion, and veterans absolutely need to show a detailed record of that exposure. Take it away.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Clay, because I think that with Terra, you don't think that just because you have something that's under that umbrella, that it's an easy claim. Mm-hmm. Treat it exactly the same as a direct service connection claim as far as evidence is concerned. I was here, here's my diagnosis, here's all my proof that I was exposed to this, which now caused this, and work with your doctor to kind of create that. It's kind of this weird morphe thing, like you had mentioned, where it's kind of feels like a secondary kind of a claim, but it's a direct service connection, but there's this weird tying it to the exposure piece, because exposure is something that could create a condition years down the road, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's different than most direct service connections, in which you would say, hey, this started in my time in service, where it's like, well, it didn't start in my time in service, right? It happened 20 years later, but it's because of the Terra umbrella, my exposure to X, right? So a great example would be like the K2 people with the uranium, right? So sure, it's not a presumptive, but uranium, high exposures cause these things. I have one of these things, and now you're tying all that together and having your doctor write you the letter that just doubles down on the fact that because of that, I have this, and that all kind of moves forward. So moving over to presumptives, which I love. I love presumptives because And obviously, look, I mean, this isn't a, I don't want to go down the road of, we need more, right? We do. I get it, right? There's other conditions out there that should be, there's other locations like K2 that should have a presumptive list. It's not what this is about. So I'm just going to talk about the good things about the fact that there's presumptives. Presumptive conditions are great because why? Because they eliminate the need for a nexus. You do not need to prove that your condition was caused due to your time in service at all. Automatically, the VA, due to your placement in service, right? Your location, where you served, except for there's even some caveats to that, which we'll dive into. But for the most part, the presumptive lists are based on areas of service, right? Most common, you're going to see Vietnam and you're going to see Gulf War stuff, right? Those are the two big ones. And if you served in one of these specified areas, locations during a specified time frame, the VA just automatically presumes that if you have any one of these conditions, they have a list of presumptive conditions for different areas, that they just presume that you have that because of your time in service for whatever the factors are. Could be burn pits, could be Agent Orange. And that is great because now all you need to provide for proof is, here's my time in service, here's my proof I served in that location during that time frame, and here's my diagnosis of that condition that's on that presumptive list. And that's it. Now, the one thing I will say, Clay, that sometimes veterans may or may not have an issue with is the severity aspect. In some cases, it is what it is, right? There's usually a lot of cancers on the presumptive list, so the cancers are what they are, right? Your severity is, it's active cancer. But there's other things where maybe you need to have a bit more of a conversation with your doctor to really detail your signs and symptoms and durations and be honest with that so you can make sure, again, that you're getting that appropriate rating through the schedule of ratings, right? It's not a hidden thing. You can find it, ECFR, Code of Federal Regulations. You can find that, or on attorneys' websites, they'll have them listed too. So rating schedule, your condition, find it, have the conversation with your doctor, make sure that you're getting all that information in there. The one thing I do want to throw out too, when it comes to presumptives, is there are some others. There's a presumptive list for every single veteran, regardless of where you ever served. Doesn't matter. Just the fact that you're a veteran and you served and you got out. And that's the 1 year presumptives, right? So if you have your time in service and you got out, and let's say that 6 months, 7 months, 8 months later, 10 months later, you go to the doctor for X. If it's not an injury, but more of like a disease, I got arthritis, or I got migraines, or hypertension, or whatever. If it's within that 1 year, you have a pretty good chance of getting that approved. So hopefully you got documented evidence within 1 year after service. You could utilize that and file a claim with the evidence that you have. You don't need to prove a nexus because obviously you didn't do anything while you were in. So you got out. Now, work with an accredited rep on that. There's also several other presumptives out there as well regarding like ALS and I can't remember them off the top of my head. There's like 4 other ones that are within 3 years, 7 years, and then lifetime, which are great. So a lot of people don't know that these things even exist. So it's important that you do know. And if I'll pull it up if you want to talk for a minute. I'll pull up those other ones. So just back over to you for a minute.
Yeah, presumptives completely take out the big three. The big three means absolutely nothing when it comes to presumptive conditions. You only need 2 things, right? A current diagnosis. This is where anytime I have seen a PACT Act claim, which doesn't exist, I'm just using it
I love
for
it.
everyone to understand. Anytime I've seen a PACT Act claim denied is due to the veteran not having a diagnosis. So if you were denied and you had a current diagnosis, I challenge you to send us your decision letter. You'll see the email on the channel there. because I've yet to find one. All you need is a current diagnosis and to meet the criteria. So for PACT Act, it's time and location. For tinnitus and hearing loss, it's a 1-year time. I think arthritis is in there as well. Then you have your cancers. You have your POW presumptives, your atomic presumptives. There are just all kinds. You have your MUCMIs. There are seriously probably about 150-ish conditions that are
Right.
presumptive, which is a lot. Migraines can be considered presumptive under certain circumstances. That comes to undiagnosed illness, and that's a whole other.
Mm.
That's actually difficult to explain. Are you ready?
Yeah. I'm going to
All right,
share
I'm going to
this
shoot
with
it
you
back to
guys
you.
now.
Okay.
So now there's the 1-year presumptives, which I kind of talked about. And again, the idea is go have a conversation. This is what I recommend everybody to do. I'll call it a benefit check-in. Contact your local accredited veteran service office, whatever it is, have a conversation with whoever answers the phone and ask if you could just set an appointment to meet with an accredited rep to just kind of get a once over, have a conversation, see if you're missing out on something, because there's two things that happen. One, they understand the veteran affairs world, and they also understand state benefits in the state that they're in. So they'll explain to you what else is out there and available. Super important to know. And I would also say bring your spouse. Bring your spouse, because it's important for them to understand how DIC works, burial benefits, all that type of stuff are all very important things. Now, when it comes to presumptive conditions, think about this for a minute from a perspective of it might not be you. It could be a loved one, right? Could be a friend, could be a loved one, could be a grandma, a grandpa, who knows, right? So if there's 4 other presumptives that are solely based on just the fact you served in the military. That's it. You served, you got out. Hansen's disease. If you got diagnosed within 3 years after discharged with Hansen's disease, that's a presumptive condition. So just simply, I served in the military, I have Hansen's disease, bam, you get a service connection. Tuberculosis. If that showed up within 3 years after discharge, service connected. Multiple sclerosis, which is hard for me to say, 7 years. If that shows up 7 years after your discharge, doesn't matter if you served 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 25 years. If it showed up within 7 years after discharge, service connected. This one is huge, Clay. ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you know that your grandfather, for example, had ALS and served in whatever branch. They did 4 years, got out, they have ALS. ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, can show up anytime, and that veteran is covered 100% by the VA. I wondered to myself, Clay, and I wondered this the first time that I read this back in the day, was I wonder how many people have served in the military and have ALS and have no clue that this is even a thing, right? And it's just the saddest thing to me to think about that poor veteran out there not having any sort of benefits from the VA for ALS specifically, and as a result, their surviving spouse at some point not having anything. And it's just a really sad situation. I don't even know what the number is. Maybe it's 0, right? Maybe it is 0, and maybe everything's fine, and maybe I'm just getting a little soft as I'm in my 50s now. But it's just important to know, and I think that folks need to know it, and I hope that people share it. Back to you.
Yeah, the not to make me sad or anything, but I would kind of add to that statement how many people served who had ALS who already died and their spouse died.
Right. Oh yeah. Right.
Man.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Ooh. Okay, so back to not depressing topic. No, that was perfect. That was presumptives. PACT Act is what gets talked about because it's recent. There are so many other presumptives that the PACT Act really overshadowed that are still there. Okay, and the last basis of service connection that we'll talk about, and then we'll talk about a few of the secondaries, and and then we'll go ahead and end this episode. Is conditions caused by VA healthcare super, super rare? However, I have seen a few of them in my time. The VA does a shoulder surgery. They, I don't know, cut something. I don't know how surgery works, right? But something bad happens. You can be service connected for whatever that is. A botched surgery. There's also a tort claim, which you're going to have to lawyer up for. Very, very hard to prove, of like malpractice. But yes, you can be service connected through as a basis of service connection because of VA healthcare mishaps. I'm not talking about, you took a medication and it didn't work and whatever, and that medication caused something. Maybe, but that would definitely have to be due to a service connected disability. This is mainly like like big, big, big deals. Do you have anything to add to that? Because it's going to be super rare. I
Right.
can't even think of a common example.
Right. So, I mean, it could be, there's basically, yes. If you're actually worse off after the surgery, look, there's been horror stories, right? I went in for my left knee, they did my right knee. You know what I mean?
That's
Um,
wild.
you know what I mean? So it's like, wow, okay. Hopefully it wasn't an amputation because that would suck.
Mm-hmm.
So it says here, if you are injured by a VA doctor or hospital, you can pursue disability compensation or file an administrative claim for damages. Disability compensation, if your injury was caused by or made worse by your active military service, obviously you may be eligible for those benefits as well, which is what we've been talking about. But they did touch on the tort claim here. And again, yeah, absolutely. If that's the route that you want to go, I agree. I mean, it's definitely the world of attorneys there. The bottom line is that if you believe that you were injured and you are worse off after your surgery, have a conversation. Don't keep that and just, and post 40,000, I hate the VAs and do a Yelp review. No, have a conversation with a lawyer or an accredited representative's office to talk about what sort of recourse you have. The nice thing is, this is a horrible situation for this to happen, right? But the nice thing is that there is some sort of recourse that is actually outlined, right? Versus, you know what I mean? So as sad as it is to say, mistakes do happen, and you're never 100% good. People go in for crazy surgeries and don't come out of them, right? They go under anesthesia and they die, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things happen. So it's important for not only you, the veteran, to understand that there could be some sort of a issue, and then there is recourse, but also your spouse should understand that too, because what happens if you cannot articulate it after the surgery, right? Or whatever it was. So, nope, that's it. Back to you.
Yeah. The worst thing that can happen is you go talk to a lawyer. You're like, I don't see an argument for this. You're like, okay, cool. That's much better than just not knowing, saying, well, maybe I could have done that 40 years ago. I wonder if there's like a time period, like what is it called whenever you can't sue someone after a certain amount of time?
Statute of limitations.
Statute of limits. I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if
Right.
that exists, because it possibly could. Okay.
Maybe on the tort side, yeah.
Yeah, the last thing I want to bring up, because I'm going to link this below in the comment section, because I know people are going to have questions on secondaries. This is a general secondary list, common secondaries. So back to what we said earlier, Jason. If you made it to this point in the video and you're looking at this document, it's not, ooh, I have an ankle condition, now I can claim nerve damage. That's not it. The question to answer is, does your X stem from your Y? Just because it does for me, or it does for Jason, or it does for your mama, okay? It does not mean it does for you. You have to get evidence that is specific to you when looking at these secondaries. So here's ankle conditions. You'll see other foot conditions, knee, leg, basically bottom up is how that's going to go. Obesity here is a solid one for ankles, especially if you have a very severe ankle condition. The most common is going to be your ear conditions, right? Tinnitus, and looking at migraines, vertigo / dizziness. The VA will call that peripheral vestibular disorders. Then you have Meniere's, hearing loss, mental
Mhm.
health, especially on the hearing loss side of the house. You could see how your anxiety would probably be spiking. You have symptom disorder. I'm sorry, SSD, somatic symptom disorder. You have sleep apnea secondary to tinnitus. I have seen that. It's not rare, or it's not common. I wouldn't say it's rare. It's uncommon if there was a point between that. Your TMJs, your foot conditions, your hypertensions, knees. I did it by body system. The VA rates body systems. So your lower back, lumbar spine, you see migraines here. Mental health has a lot. You see some respiratory conditions, shoulders, sleep apnea. I took sleep apnea out of respiratory because it's although it's similar, it's it's not the same. Okay. And there are some secondaries that stem from sleep apnea that would not stem from rhinitis and sinusitis, so to speak, like hypertension would be one. Then we have the cervical conditions. So the back, you see the back up here, which is lower spine, cervical